Tonight, what does it mean that an abortion pill drug will stay on the market for now? How some Texas lawmakers are responding to the Supreme Court's decision to halt a sweeping ruling from a Texas federal judge. Plus, expanding Medicaid for new Texas moms.
Yes, the mom has the baby, but it takes months, sometimes almost years, to us to completely heal.
Why some lawmakers say extra coverage is important in a post-Roe Texas. And later, is a pension increase long overdue for some in the state? Retired Texas teachers are schooling lawmakers on the rising cost of living. Capitol Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capitol Tonight. I'm Karina Kling. A widely used abortion pill remains on the market for now. Friday night, the U.S. Supreme Court blocked lower court rulings that banned or restricted the drug while a legal challenge plays out. The fate of mifepristone was up in the air after a federal judge in Texas ruled the Food and Drug Administration improperly approved the medication more than 20 years ago. So what's next for the case? It now goes back to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where a 3-judge panel is set to hold a hearing next month. The loser is likely to ask the Supreme Court to take up the case on its merits. Until then, there will be no change in access to the medication in states where abortion is legal. While abortion rights supporters in Texas have suffered one defeat after another in recent years, they're cheering this latest decision. But groups opposing abortion rights remain hopeful their lawsuit to suspend federal approval of the drug will prevail. Our Washington reporter Rena Diamante has the story.
Dr. Leah Tatum is an obstetrician gynecologist in Austin who sees firsthand how Texas's restrictions on surgical and medication abortion affect those with pregnancy complications.
We also see the laws every day affect patients who have lethal anomalies, a very desired pregnancy, and a fetus is diagnosed with something that's incompatible with life. And we see patients, asking us, is there anything that we can do? But in the state of Texas, ultimately, if it's not an immediate risk to mom's life, we can't do anything.
Tatum says while she is grateful the Supreme Court ruled late Friday to maintain the status quo nationwide when it comes to the abortion pill mifepristone, the ongoing litigation creates confusion and fear among Texas patients.
I have seen patients who are fearful to even pursue a pregnancy in the state of Texas.
In a decision late Friday, the Supreme Court granted a request from the Biden administration to pause a Texas judge's ruling to suspend the Food and Drug Administration's 23-year-old's approval of mifepristone. The organization seeking to suspend the FDA's approval downplayed the court's decision and told Spectrum News it remains confident their lawsuit will succeed.
When a court looks at the totality of the facts and the law in this case, they're going to see how egregious the FDA has conducted itself over the course of the last 2 decades. The FDA had to characterize pregnancy as an illness, argue that these drugs provide a meaningful therapeutic benefit, neither of which are true.
President Joe Biden and other Democrats praised the decision to keep access to mifepristone while the legal fight continues. Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher of Houston says she'll continue to defend the FDA's scientific judgment. She's introduced legislation to affirm that.
What happens if you go through all the trials, you get a drug approved, and 20 years later, some judge or party comes along and undoes the process this way? So there's a lot of concern there.
The case now returns to a federal appeals court based in New Orleans. A hearing has been scheduled for mid-March, and the court's decision likely will be appealed to the Supreme Court. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
And joining us now to discuss what's next for this case further is Seth Chandler. He's a law professor at the University of Houston Law Center. Professor Chandler, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
This case now heads back to the Fifth Circuit, as mentioned, which has already ruled the drug should remain on the market, but with restrictions, more restrictions than currently in place now. So what are you expecting? What is the court likely to hear?
Yes, it may not be the same panel of the Fifth Circuit that actually hears the decision on the merits. The earlier case was heard on a very accelerated basis by what's called a motions panel. And so the judges may be different this time around. And I think more importantly, they're going to have more time to think about the very serious implications of granting plaintiffs relief here. Because those implications aren't just about this case or about abortion pills. They're about all sorts of medications that the FDA approves and who can sue when there's some objection years later to those drugs.
Given what you're saying, I mean, what is the likelihood this ends up before the Supreme Court yet again?
Yeah, usually you should bet against cases going to the Supreme Court, but this is a pretty important case, and it's not just important because it's about abortion. It's actually about much more than abortion. It's about what sort of damages do you have to suffer before you can go into court and challenge some policy that you don't like. It's about how much confidence can a drug manufacturer have that they've gotten their drug through the whole FDA process. And now, years later, after they've spent millions and billions of dollars marketing and using this thing, someone comes along and finds a flaw with the process. So I think all of those factors make this case more likely than most that it will get to the Supreme Court again.
With that being said, I mean, with Friday's ruling from the justices, can we read anything into kind of how they could potentially rule if they do take this up again?
Not really, because even the set quote 7-2 vote isn't really a 7-2 vote. It could have been a 5-4 vote. We don't know why they ruled that way. So I think it's really an open question what would happen at the Supreme Court the second time around. And that might also depend on exactly how the Fifth Circuit rules in this case.
Yeah, so it was basically just that two dissented, and that's kind of where people were coming up with this 7-2, even though we don't really know how they voted, as you were mentioning. Medication abortion drugs remain available as this legal challenge plays out, as we've been saying, but only in states where abortion is legal. What do you think this means for Texans?
Well, for Texans, it means in some sense we had a false alarm over the past couple of weeks in which we had a judge's decision that would have, I guess, not had as much of an effect in Texas, but certainly would have had an effect elsewhere. In Texas, it's still extremely difficult to get a medication abortion, and it's basically almost impossible to get a true surgical abortion in Texas, and nothing that's happened over the past couple of weeks has changed that.
Lastly, in terms of just kind of moving this forward, and I mean the fights that continue to play out, do you see the legislature doing any more with regards to this? Maybe not this session, but even into the future.
Well, sure. The moral battle about abortion is likely to continue for many, many years, just as it has for the past 50 years. You see bills pending in the current Texas legislature, both by right to life forces and by pro-choice forces. And I would expect that battle to continue, and also to continue in Congress, where there may be attempts to have federal solutions, so that anyone who thought that the Dobbs decision last summer was going to resolve once and for all the issue of abortion has once again finding themselves sadly mistaken.
Professor Seth Chandler, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
The Texas House passed its major school safety bills in response to the Uvalde shooting. The measures would impose a number of safety requirements, like having safety inspections of every building at least once every 5 years. The Texas Education Agency promised to withhold grant money from schools that don't meet certain safety standards. The legislation would also require every school to have one armed person on campus, which the bill's author says is vital to keep students safe.
The TEA and the commissioner in charge of it and outside safety consultants, and they said, look, you're going to need to mandate this for a lot of different reasons, and they did ask me to put this language in there. It is very important. I think most Texans would agree.
The measures would also give grants to students who want to attend another school if their current one isn't meeting safety standards, and lawmakers voted to install silent panic alert buttons in every classroom. The Senate passed its major school safety bill last week. Retired Texas teachers rallied at the Capitol today, hoping to sway lawmakers to increase their pensions this legislative session. Both the House and Senate have bills to give retired teachers a combination of one-time checks and ongoing cost of living adjustments, or COLA, meant to help with ongoing expenses. But some teachers say it's not significant enough to combat record-setting inflation.
It's time. In fact, it's past time. We would do that years ago. So to rectify or to make up for that, we need a COLA, a substantial amount of COLA, so we can recover, we meaning the retirees.
If passed this session, it would be the first cost of living adjustment since 2013. The Senate's already passed its bill, and the House is expected to take a vote on its version soon. The Texas House wants to expand Medicaid coverage for new moms. The measure passed overwhelmingly last week and would let new mothers stay on Medicaid for up to a year after giving birth. Currently, postpartum coverage expires after just 2 months in Texas. Our Charlotte Scott has more.
When the pandemic struck in 2020, Patrice Lott was uninsured. She had a 13-year-old daughter at the time and would only go to clinics she could afford when she needed care. Then she got pregnant and qualified for Medicaid.
I was only pregnant with that particular child for a little around 2 months, and I ended up having a miscarriage. So I was on the road to almost lost my Medicaid, but then I ended up pregnant again.
At age 35, Lott's second pregnancy was considered high risk, and after having her baby, she discovered many health issues. She also got sick with the coronavirus.
I was able to get all sorts of treatments to keep me alive, and they came into my home when I had COVID, and they were able to see me, so I was able to stay out of the hospitals as well. So it was very helpful.
Lott benefited from a pandemic-era policy that said new moms could not be kicked off Medicaid after just 2 months, which is Texas's coverage limit. But that extension ended on April 1st, and now millions of Texans are at risk of losing their insurance. But with overwhelming bipartisan support, the House recently passed a bill by Dallas area Representative Tony Rose that would extend Medicaid coverage for new moms to a year. Houston area Republican J.C. Jaton signed on as a co-author of the bill.
Being a pro-life Republican, I think that goes beyond the abortion issue, and that goes into making sure that we're taking care of the most vulnerable around us, and that includes mothers, especially new mothers.
The legislation now heads to the Senate. During the last legislative session, the Senate received a similar bill but reduced the coverage to 6 months. Federal officials blocked it from taking effect, so coverage remains at just 2 months. Diana Forrester with Texans Care for Children is hopeful that with a new approach and bipartisan support, the bill will make it to the governor's desk.
I think we're in a really good spot going into the Senate. The momentum is really there for this legislation.
As for Lott, she hopes other new moms get to benefit from longer postpartum insurance coverage like she did, because she knows how long it can take to physically and emotionally recover from childbirth. For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
And still to come on Capitol Tonight, outfit oversight, why a memo about staff dress code from a Texas elected official is creating legal questions. Plus, Dan Patrick ramps up his attacks on the Texas House Speaker. The latest in the ongoing feud over policy priorities. Welcome back. Here's a check of some of the other political stories making headlines across Texas. Early voting kicked off across the state today for the May 6th election. Texans will give their opinion on a number of local issues, and you can check the Secretary of State's website to see what's on your ballot. Early voting runs through May 2nd. Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller issued a memo to staff outlining dress code rules. The department is requiring employees to comply, quote, in a manner consistent with their biological gender. The document was first obtained by the Texas Observer and says employees who are deemed to be violating the dress code will face corrective action and could be asked to leave and change their outfit. The department did not respond to a request for comment. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is ramping up his attacks on House Speaker Dade Phelan. In an interview with a conservative radio show this morning, Patrick criticized Phelan for not making progress on certain bills like the Senate's property tax plan and a number of anti-LGBTQ bills.
We have a speaker that has forgotten who elected him and who elected his majority of members.
Last week, Patrick told us he might hold up certain must-pass bills in order to force a special session if the House doesn't come around on some of his top legislative priorities. The cable news landscape was rocked today by the departures of two longtime anchors. CNN's Don Lemon announced on Twitter he was fired. He's faced a tumultuous period at the network, especially after his remarks about women's ages, which prompted outcry and a temporary suspension from his show. Separately, Fox News said it parted ways with Tucker Carlson in this decision that was mutually agreed upon. The announcement comes 1 week after Fox News settled a defamation lawsuit with Dominion Voting Systems over the network's spreading of election lies in which Carlson played a key role. Carlson's departure sparked outcry among Republicans and conservative critics, including Texans like Lieutenant Governor Patrick. Let's bring in the Quorum Report's Harvey Kronberg now. Harvey, good to see you.
It's a pleasure. How are you doing?
Good. Let's start with Tucker Carlson and just the significance of this here in Texas. I mean, Patrick giving him a shout out on Twitter saying he's been a friend for a long time. This is, a loss to the network and to news. Governor Abbott and him have battled a little bit back and forth. What do you think this departure means for just kind of Texas politicians as a whole?
Well, Tucker Carlson kind of belongs to the school of journalism that generally is fact-free. So his departure doesn't really impact news reporting per se, but he's significant as an opinion shaper. And on several occasions, he's gone after Governor Abbott. Governor Abbott, because of the nature of his audience, is essentially the Republican primary voter, the only one they're afraid of at the Capitol. He has generally responded immediately, almost it seemed like an immediate reaction, changing policy. So for instance, recently he was criticized for not pardoning recently convicted murderer Daniel Perry after shooting a Black Lives Matters demonstrator. Within hours, the governor had announced that Perry had not even been sentenced yet, and the governor announced that he was going to start the process of paroling him. Yeah. The joke around the Capitol today was that this just liberated Governor Abbott.
Setting the agenda, we've kind of seen the reaction from that. Also, just in terms of Lieutenant Governor Patrick and this kind of ongoing feud with Dade Phelan over priorities, how do you think this plays to Phelan? I mean, he's been pretty muted and not responding to Dan Patrick, and Dan Patrick obviously coming on this show as well as others and saying how he feels about the speaker not passing some of his priority bills and moving slowly, as he puts it.
Well, I do believe that that's correct. I believe the speaker is choking the flow of legislation, but there's a lot of bad bills right now, and to a certain degree, he's following the model of Joe Strauss, the speaker who ended his career in 2019. Strauss simply ignored Patrick. It drove Patrick nuts, and so the language became more and more incendiary. But there's no real negotiating with Dan Patrick. It's his way or the highway. And his on your show, his somewhat cavalier threat to essentially force a special session and then blame it on Phelan is, to say the least, I think counterproductive. The speaker was a freshman speaker last time. I think he was a little bit intimidated. This time he's got the support of his chamber. They don't see the enemy as Democrats versus Republicans. They see their adversary as the Senate.
Who do you think blinks first in all of this then?
That's a good question. Eventually, what'll happen, we'll probably go through a special session or two, and what'll probably happen is that some wiser heads will sit in a room and say, okay, we can do this, it'll make it look like a victory for Patrick, we'll do this, make it look like a victory for Phelan, and substantively accomplish very little.
Yeah. Lastly, Harvey, the Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller out with his memo ordering employees to dress according to their biological gender. I mean, your reaction to that, and what about the legality of this move?
Well, dress codes are not a particularly subject per se of any kind of discrimination or harassment type of lawsuits to my knowledge. There may be a cause of action an ingenious attorney can come up with, but pegging it to the transgender politics plays directly to Sid Miller's base. Believe it or not, Sid Miller, the Secretary of Agriculture or Commissioner of Agriculture here in Texas, probably has as big a social media platform as Governor Abbott does in terms of numbers of followers. Sure. And so playing to his audience is only good for his political career. Yeah, I know we were hearing from some employment attorneys that it bans the violating Title VII, banning employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender, as well as the First Amendment. So kind of we'll see how all of that plays out in terms of the legal arguments. Harvey Kronberg, thank you very much. My pleasure. Still to come on Capitol tonight, caution in Sudan, why the U.S. says it won't send troops to get Americans out of that country as tensions rise.
Welcome back. Chief Justice John Roberts is declining to directly respond to a Senate Judiciary Committee request for him to testify at a Supreme Court ethics hearing next month. The hearing request comes after a ProPublica report showed Dallas-based GOP megadonor Harlan Crow subsidized luxury travel for Justice Clarence Thomas. The Senate Judiciary Committee chair says if the court doesn't address ethical standards, that Congress will have to step in. A ceasefire is now in effect in Sudan amid rising tensions. The U.S. says it hopes the order will create an opportunity for Americans who want to get out to be able to leave. But the U.S. also says it has no plans to put troops on the ground to assist in the evacuation. Our Torian Small has more.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan drawing a line in U.S. intervention in the Sudanese war, telling reporters Monday there are no plans to put troops on the ground to assist with the mass evacuation, despite thousands of U.S. citizens still remaining in the East African nation.
It is not standard practice for the United States to send in the U.S. military into war zones to extract all American citizens. But Americans should understand that we will go to great lengths to support and facilitate their departure from difficult circumstances, that we will try to protect them from harm as best as we possibly can, but that there should not be a broad expectation of a massive military operation.
But the U.S. did work through the weekend to airlift hundreds of diplomats out of Sudan following the closure of the U.S. embassy. Several disaster response teams have been deployed to the country's capital region to help with humanitarian efforts. Concerns over water, food, and medicine shortages fueling this pivot. The total number of U.S. citizens left behind is unknown, but reportedly around 16,000 registered with the embassy as being in Sudan. Sullivan underscoring the exit from Afghanistan was the exception, not the rule, ruling out a similar seizure of the Khartoum International Airport to move U.S. civilians. He said, quote, naval assets were being provided to assist in a land evacuation, but again, without boots on the ground. In Washington, Torian Small, Capital Tonight.
And before we go tonight, we want to congratulate Irving area elementary school teacher Shelley Jeffrey. She was celebrated today at the White House as Texas's Teacher of the Year for 2023. The event recognizes one teacher from each state and territory for their excellence in teaching and commitment to students' learning. The chosen teachers participate in policy discussions at both the state and national levels. Congratulations to Shelley. What an honor. That is going to do it for this edition of Capital Tonight. We are back tomorrow with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Stay safe and have a great night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. And for more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button right over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app to get live news coverage, weather alerts, and more wherever you are. And don't forget to tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV for live local reporting every single day. We'll see you then.